everyone's enthusiasm for this subject because I'm already getting a ton of really creative ideas. So I'm going to try and be brief because I have a lot to get through. My name is Christina Trower. I'm a PhD student at Rice University. I have a master's in educational psychology, so I have experience in voc rehab and special education. And I also have a younger brother who's 24 years old who has profound autism, intellectual disability, and epilepsy. This is a subject that's very close to my heart, so I'll just delve right in. This is a self-monitoring intervention that was implemented in a customized employment and naturalistic setting. I'm going to skip this slide. I think you guys know what's going on. So the first research question that I really wanted to answer was really fueled by my work with a cooperative in Champaign, Illinois. It was formed by 40+ families of individuals with significant disabilities as an alternative to the agency solution area. Very small community Champaign. There's one agency, not very progressive to say the least, and so this was their alternative to that. And they had a number of individuals who were placed in the community in employment, and for whatever reason, they were stagnating, they weren't progressing, they weren't able to offer any more support on site. And so I was wondering what trainings and interventions are the most effective that can really help improve the job performance of these individuals. So I first conducted a literature review, and this really could be a study unto itself, so I can really highlight the main pieces. So the interventions that really fell out as being the most effective were self-management by and large, also preference choice making, positive behavioral support, and visual supports. And then I also used this literature review to fuel the different variables. So they kind of break into two categories. One is really behavioral and one is more accuracy. So behavioral performance, inappropriate behavior, accuracy, compliance, correct responses. So that kind of shed light on the first research question. And I had individuals in mind, and the cooperative did as well. You know, who can we help? What components of these trainings and interventions are going to be the most effective for people who right now are struggling? They've been in their job for a year and a half and they need some relief now. So the cooperative had a pool of individuals. I selected, well, they helped me, it was a cooperative process, 3 individuals. They were ages 22 to 29. They had autism spectrum disorder, intellectual disability, or both. And they were placed via customized employment in natural employment settings in the community. So one worked at a regional grocery store, one worked at a mid-sized electronics store, and one worked at an early childhood daycare center. And I kind of pulled from the self-management intervention literature and introduced a 2-part intervention package, starting with goal setting and then a self-monitoring sheet, which, as we've kind of discussed, is really important to help individuals structure their time on the job and expectations haven't been made clear to them, or they have varying relationships with their coworkers and supervisors. So this is kind of an interesting bridge of the literature here, but the first step really in this field of research is a functional assessment interview, which plays the role of a job analysis. It's really just a person-centered job analysis. So instead of asking what are the components of the job, what are the minimal requirements, minimal capabilities, it's focused on what are the strengths of the individual, how can we highlight those strengths of the individual and help them to perform better at their job. So I interviewed their supervisors, their coworkers, their job specialists at the cooperative, their job coach, their families. It's a really holistic process. And so these dependent variables fell out of that process and were operationalized for each individual. And then I went back to their jobs and I observed them on the job during this process as well. And I task analyzed their jobs. And so I was able to look at job task completion individualized by participant by actually going through a checklist and knowing by observing if they were actually completing all aspects of their job, as well as the typical on-task, off-task behavior. So again, the intervention, first goal setting, and then self-monitoring. So the way this graph is structured, the participants are on the right side of the x-axis, and then the phases are on the bottom. It started with A as baseline, B was goal setting, C is self-monitoring, and D is maintenance. The first participant, Curtis, number 1, he was actually really on task at the start of the intervention. His issue was with task completion. So he only really experienced sort of a moderate increase, 6%. He still experienced an increase. And I also wanted to address why his line stops after the self-monitoring section. This really highlights the social validity of this study. He actually lost his job during the course of the intervention, which was really unfortunate, but it was due to a lack of communication with supervisors. we interviewed the supervisors. To all intents and purposes, he was a fantastic employee. They raved about how hardworking he was, but he was showing up consistently 2 minutes late. And he was at a really large grocery store where you would incur infractions by a point system, and he was already at 11.5 points when we started the intervention process, and he had to get to 12 before he was going through the HR process and being shown the door. And there was nothing you could do because it was such a large organization. So these are really people who are on the precipice of losing their jobs. They've had their jobs for 1.5 years, and for whatever reason, they're losing their hours, they're not getting promoted. So this is a really important issue, and sadly, though this happened, I think it highlights the importance of that issue. So for the other participants, Abe is number 2. From baseline to self-management, he really experienced a pretty impressive increase, 42%, and he maintained a 35% increase, and Natalie, 35%, 33%, pretty similar. As far as task completion goes, there were pretty extreme gains across all participants. And for Curtis, out of 3 of his 4 job tasks, so he's only doing one of his job tasks at the start of the intervention, he experienced gains of 65% or more. Abe experienced gains of 32% or more across all of his job tasks, as did Natalie, who experienced gains of 28% or more. So these are just examples of the self-monitoring sheets that kind of led to these gains. And it is a pretty simple intervention in terms of going in and kind of making these sheets for each participant. So this was Curtis's, and unfortunately he lost his job before I could actually get a picture of it at work, but this is what it looked like. It was posted on the wall outside of the store where he spent most of his time working, and he would just go through and check off. This was Abe's, which was initially designed for him to carry in his pocket, but he rightly pointed out that that was somewhat stigmatizing since he was the only person who had to do that. Why did he have to do it? I didn't have a great answer for that question. So we adapted it to be on his phone, and he was able to actually fill out his self-monitoring package, and he could just email it to us, which was brilliant and really facilitated sort of the transfer to post-intervention, post-maintenance. And then this is Natalie's, which was mounted inside her classroom. She perseverated a lot on her job tasks and just kind of the checklist that she had prior. So we were trying to make this quick for her. So the magnet system was great for her because it was one fell swoop and she was done. So some of the implications from this research, goal setting is really surprising given the vast amount of literature on goal setting that it wasn't more effective. So we hypothesized this was because of the way we measured it. It was really just we set a goal collaboratively, and then before data collection, we had them restate the goal, and then after data collection, we had them again restate the goal. And we didn't think that that actually led to them actualizing the goal or internalizing it. And then we are also dealing with individuals with varying levels of intellectual disability, and goal setting is somewhat of a cognitive process. So there is probably a better way to incorporate goal setting in an intervention than the way that we did it, but future research really should shed more light on that. Self-monitoring undeniably had a really strong impact across participants, across dependent variables. And so some just very interesting things that kind of we noticed throughout data collection. We've already talked about Abe's initial resistance to the self-monitoring sheet that we felt was stigmatizing. And so we kind of were able to change that. And I think, like Sam was saying, there are very simple accommodations that you can make that really make a huge difference in terms of how the employees actually experience their time on the job. We also wound up doing these lunch meetings. Some of my first data collection sessions were a disaster, actually. I would go into the store and Abe would freak out, or someone would they really reacted to me. They didn't really know me, they kind of knew me. And we really had to work collaboratively to get them to be comfortable with us. And it wound up being great because then we could talk about things that were upcoming. They knew it was coming, and it actually informed the development of the self-monitoring portion because we could incorporate their feedback. So I think that was really useful, and it kind of became part of the intervention retroactively. So thinking about ways to kind of collaborate more in this intervention process would be a very good area for future research as well. Also, the way that these self-monitoring tasks were set up were like inextricably social. And these were people who were not socializing on the job, which was one of the main reasons they were on the precipice of losing their jobs. So we were just anecdotally observing, wow, these individuals are interacting so much more than they were prior, but that wasn't a variable that we were anticipating really looking at, so I can't really say much about that, other than this is a really good way to kind of get at that social piece that really affected all of these participants. So limitations, obviously the loss of Curtis's job limits experimental control. It was a multiple baseline study, so we staggered individuals in and held everyone constant in baseline while we moved them through the intervention process. So while we do have 3 data points across 3 conditions for the 3 participants. We kind of lost him in maintenance. So it limits kind of the implications, what I can say about that. There was some reactivity. Natalie, for like 2 weeks, was completely performing at very consistent levels, which was very unusual. Her job coach had kind of instructed her, oh, when the researchers are here, be on task. And we're like, oh, come on. So I was like looking through a window in a classroom with adjacent